The big debate is done to a degree. Theresa May couldn't be bothered to show though. She says she is party for the people. She says she is party for the common people. She keeps saying she is putting in funds to the NHS. But is she? Cuts to the fire brigade, police. Deaths have risen by 21% due to cuts on the fire brigade. Now I found a report that says different, certainly in respect to the NHS. Took some time finding, but let's see what Theresa May has to say about the NHS.
I've personally dedicated the last 12 years of my life to a career in medicine. I'm now at the point of seriously considering resignation because things have gotten so bad on the shop floor. What are you planning to do about these crippling frontline staff shortages, which have worsened as a result of the government's failure to invest properly in the NHS?
We have put the extra funding into the NHS, and by 2020 it'll be, in real terms, £10 billion extra a year.
You've reappointed the Health Secretary, someone who has demoralised the entire workforce of the NHS.
I think Jeremy Hunt has done a very good job in saying to everybody that what we need to focus on is actually the quality of care for patients. Now,
in 2015 and 16, patients spent more than 1.8 million extra days in hospital because of delays in their discharge. A report that included a statement from the King's Fund said, the principal cause of the deficit is the fact that funding has not kept pace with demand. They also say that the service is majorly underfunded. 85% of physicians say that current NHS funding is simply not enough to meet rising demand for services. Now, according to this report, this demand increases by 4% every year. In real terms, NHS funding will increase by only 2% per year to 2020. Cuts to the budgets of social care and public health service and recorded hospital deficits of 2.45 billion are already impacting on patient care, and we all know that. Also, growing waiting lists, patients stuck in hospital because of discharge delays, emergency departments closing their doors and rationing treatment. But Theresa May still insists they are pro-NHS. We have all seen parts of the Naylor report, haven't we? I don't know if you've read it, I have read a little bit. It talks about selling off land, 2-for-1 bargains on NHS land. Theresa May says she supports this, but if you have just heard, right at the top, 10 billion a year. Well, again, the N.I.C.E report states hospital budgets are actually feeling the strain. In 2015, hospitals recorded a deficit of 2.45 billion, the highest it's ever been apparently, and 3 times higher than the previous year, 2015. Once accounting adjustments and one-off savings are stripped away, the underlying deficit looks even worse, with some estimating it as high as 3.7 billion. But apparently only one area in England, Gloucestershire, reports a combined surplus for providers and commissioners, a £3.8 billion funding injection in 2016. And some increases to hospital payments should help hospitals to balance the books. But at what long-term cost? The National Audit Office found that long-term investment plans have been set aside for the short-term goal of meeting day-to-day spending. Apparently, this means that investment in new buildings and new equipment is on hold, as the UK has some of the more intensely used MRI and CT scanners in the EU. But the NHS is seriously understaffed, under-doctored even. The ratio for doctors and patients is low, very low compared to other countries. The UK has 1 doctor for every 360 people, compared with an EU average of 1 doctor for every 288 people. That's fewer doctors per 100,000 people than almost every other major EU country. Together with a shortage of nurses as well, this has left our hospitals massively understaffed. This increases pressure on hard-working NHS staff, puts patients at risk obviously, and threatens the future of our NHS. Action has to be taken quickly to relieve the current pressure on the NHS workforce, and a brave plan has to be brought about to ensure that the NHS is staffed and sustainable in the long term. After the deal over the doctors' contracts, one junior doctor was asked who really won over the strikes. Well, Dr. Nadia Massoud said, and I quote, Who won? They did. The government have won in the short term, and I'm worried that they will now do the same thing to nurses, consultants, to all staff in the NHS. But long term, I fear that more junior doctors will decide not to train to be NHS consultants and quit, and that more people will be burned out mentally or physically. The nurse at the top of this episode said she was preparing to quit. Now, as of 2016, there are fewer medical students now than in 2010, despite an increasing number of patients between 2013 and 2015. The number of doctor vacancies increased by 60%. Hospitals failed to recruit to 2 in every 5 advertised consultants. Physician posts, roles that hospitals desperately need. Could this be a result of the 7-year pay cap? Doctors feel, obviously, overworked and underpaid. This statement from a pensioner shows the reality of what the current government is doing to various services in our NHS. And I quote, "Like so many others of my generation, we have worked for more than 50 years without claiming any welfare support. It came as an unwelcome blow when my wife, having suffered for 30 years with the loss of health and gradual decline brought on by Parkinson's, was informed that just at the point is reached where the impact of her illness and the level of total care needed are close to their peak, the NHS could not provide it free of charge." Now, Theresa May and the Conservatives, in my opinion, are bad for the NHS. I have highlighted many times how Tory MPs have taken what they call donations in return for the awarding of NHS contracts. Some have even had vested interests in the company. Linda Wooten in 2013, a double heart and lung transplant patient, had her benefits stopped and then died 9 days later. Linda Wooten, 49, was on 10 prescription drugs a day, suffering high blood pressure, renal failure and regular blackouts. Yet, Atos, the private firm carrying out the government's controversial work capability assessments, ruled she was fit enough to find a job after she was interviewed. Now, they've now gone on to lose that contract. But what happens if we lose the NHS? What happens if it becomes privatised and we have companies making sure they increase the profits to increase the dividends to shareholders, which means they will be driven by profits and not patient care? People struggle now with utility bills. Will that happen if healthcare companies increase premiums to a point that we can no longer afford if the NHS is privatised? How about this advice from Hannah Middlebrook from Oklahoma? "After reading this morning's terrible news, it struck me my friends in the UK need to hear something many Brits may not have considered. If the Manchester Arena bombing had happened in the US, every family with a dead or injured member would begin receiving bills in the coming days. Parents who lost their children would get a detailed and undaunted list of services provided by the medics that tried to save their relations' lives, and they would be expected to start making payments immediately. While they mounted heartbreaking losses, American families would be billed for the ambulance rides, morphine, CPR and anaesthesia. They would be expected to pony up for surgeries that were unsuccessful, medication that didn't work, and the time the anaesthesiologists spent trying to keep their children comfortable during major procedures. They would continue to receive those bills for months after the death of their children. Many families would set up GoFundMe accounts to pay for the medical expenses of their deceased child. The bills would run into the hundreds of thousands. So even the best funded account would only pay a fraction. The parents might have to sell their homes while trying to wrap their minds around the needless loss of their children. Ultimately, many would declare bankruptcy. Who has time to pore over bills, fight the constant inaccuracies, totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars when they're battling depression and anger? Think about that. is the kind of society you're really signing up for when you vote for a party that wants to privatise your healthcare. Please, please don't make that mistake. What about life before the NHS? RAF veteran Harry Leslie Smith tells us what it's like, and I quote, "The time before the NHS was an uncivilised time because public healthcare didn't exist. Back then, hospitals, doctors and medicines were there for the privileged few because they were run by profit rather than for vital state service that keeps a nation, its citizens and workers fit and healthy. Sadly, rampant poverty and no healthcare were the norm for the Britain of his youth. That injustice galvanised my generation to become, after the Second World War, the tide that raised all boats. Election Day 1945 was one of the proudest days of my life. I felt that I was finally getting a chance to grab destiny by the shirt collar. And this is why I voted an undisclosed party at the time. But he voted for the party he did for the creation of the NHS. And that's what we need to do, vote NHS. We all know that the Conservatives will not save the NHS. Labour will and want to, because once it is gone, we will not get it back. We have to stick together to save it, because united, as I always say, we can have a better society and a better political system. What do you think about the current situation on the NHS? Are you a doctor or nurse working in the NHS? Your opinion on this matter means the most. What changes have you seen due to cuts? Now, I really want to get these videos out there and get these debates going, hopefully towards getting us a better country. Help me achieve that sooner or later. They will listen to us and we will get the changes we want. Comment below. The best comments, as I always say, will appear on Twitter on Sunday. Make your voice heard. Someone somewhere will listen. Thanks for watching. Please do subscribe, and I will see you next week in the final week of the elections. Bye bye for now. You like that bit about Maggie Thatcher, didn't you? Fuck's sake, how warm is it in here?